Yeah, my best friend growing up, her mom was the school librarian, and she was kind of like the teacher in Hot for Teacher. There's just something a little bit off about her, a little too sexy for third grade librarian. And my friend would come home from lunch, because we used to go home for lunch. I would go home every day, and she'd go home for every day for lunch, and her mom would make her recurl her hair. And so it's really about this mom bringing up this daughter to be like her. And I don't know why, for some weird reason, it was just part of my psyche when we were writing that song. Just the idea that we moms can kind of have this image in our heads of who we are and how we're perceived, and how we project that on our daughters, and the image of her putting perfume behind her knees for the little boys and as they walk through the library, that to me, even though it's not, the perfume is in the song, but you don't know that she's a librarian, but that was a reality. That's who she was. And so she turned up in one of my songs, No One Is Safe. I'm like Taylor Swift.
It's funny because drawing from sources that are just everyday life actually can reveal that there's some really interesting aspect to somebody that you had no idea, like this librarian. So, I think that's what's fascinating. People are fascinating. Even though maybe like the janitor, you have no idea what his world is like, but maybe he's like this Albert Einstein that refuses to get into the trappings of where everybody thinks he should be. But when you're writing these songs, many things can sort of be conjured up that you didn't have before. And that's what I love about writing is you start off with nothing, and then you just need just a little morsel of anything, and it can grow into something
just a
cool.
Sperm of an idea. And then the next thing you know, the egg turns into a baby.
That's right.
And then that baby comes out, and you give it to the world, and they criticize it. I don't exactly remember what.
Wasn't it a diary or something?
Yeah,
like
what
that?
inspired it, but it is about the idea of writing a book about a tell-all book. But I don't remember what we had been talking about. But the idea of just betraying all in writing a book, and how damaging that would be. And for the life of me, I have no idea why we started writing it. But I will tell you the reason that it sounds the way that it does is that our good friend Chad Blake mixed the record, and he had found a piece of gear called a Morley at a garage sale. And even though we liked what we had, it was much more conventional. But then he took the track and he ran the whole track through this, basically it's a tin can, like a coffee can with a spring in it. Ran the whole track through it, and it made it just feel like, whoa, whoa. So it takes you on this journey of, I think in some ways it illustrates the betrayal even more by making you feel like you're going a little bit crazy, going a little insane, like you've just been gaslighted.
Sometimes you don't really need to make sense of it just of a song all that much. If you believe the importance of it, you can get what the meaning is across. Because I think everybody you'll listen to something and you may have your own vision. And that's what I think makes songs interesting, is that they can be perceived so many different ways, and not just like one completely black and white way, And that, to me, the book, I remember, it's foggy right now because that was so long ago, but I remember Sheryl talking about like just this, that it's like the discovery of a lover's diary, and it's almost like a horror, like the truth is revealed, in an instant like this. And so originally, I think we wanted to have strings kind of like the eerie strings in Ode to Billy Joe, and that we had put strings on it. I think it was Van Dyke Parks did strings, but he made it so beautiful, and that it was supposed to be more like horror, or like more of a funeral or something like that. So it didn't quite work. But then I think when Sheryl gave the track to Chad, and wasn't I think Mitchell Froom did some horns or something like that on it.
Put like a Salvation Army kind of sounding thing on it.
And that made it
It was almost like a funeral, like a New Orleans funeral.
New Orleans funeral, perfectly matched where we were, and those guys just really hit it spot on. Whereas everybody, you think, oh yeah, a big orchestra will make it sound great. It did sound great, but it wasn't supposed to sound, grand. It was supposed to be sorrowful. So I think those guys really, they got it big time.
No, we got out. I mean, Jeff and I have never made a record, with the exception of this last one, really, where we didn't go out and collect fodder. We would hit, we've hit bookstores in the past. We've, in the old days, we'd go hang out at the Olive until 4 in the morning or whatever. But now that we're older, we don't do that. But there are always things to write about. We didn't have any, we had no problem finding things to write about on this past record. But in the past, it is fun to go out, especially when you're away from home, go out in New Orleans and spend some time with the people down there. And I guarantee you come back and you feel like you've just walked around a little bit in somebody else's shoes. And invariably at the maiden voyage, you would speak with a woman there that was on her way to somewhere else, or in conflict with her spirituality, or there was always a story. And I think that's the story no matter what you're doing. You're always in conflict with some belief system that you have about what you should be doing or what you believe yourself worthy of, and it's part of the human experience.
On our way to the maiden voyage, there was this karaoke bar right next to it. And as we were walking by, there's a girl singing "Can't Cry Anymore," and
that's right.
And Sheryl goes, "Oh, should we go in there?" And I'm like, "Oh man, we can't go in there." She would freak because she was singing Sheryl's song, But it was so odd.
Our first song.
Yeah, it's just crazy that those things, sort of, yeah.
Kismet, yeah. I had just read Ask the Dust, and for some weird reason, that book just got into my psyche and became the alter ego for a lot of the record. I just found myself writing lyrics in that voice. And sometimes like if you read a Bob Dylan song, you'll find that you sit down and you start playing the guitar, you wind up playing in that cadence or whatever. You can be really influenced by whatever it is you've just listened to. But I had just read that book, and it had such a profound effect on me that when I closed it, when I was done with it, I really missed those characters, and they seemed to sort of, while we were living in this strange place that neither one of us had ever lived, and it's a very romantic place, and it's very evocative, and you're out late at night and there's lots of people around and it's seedy, and it just seemed like an extension of Ask the Dust. And it definitely made its way into that song, and it definitely made its way into Sweet Rosalyn. It sort of informed, or maybe it liberated my voice for that record, as far as my voice as in the writing, the lyrics. I read Bukowski before I read John Fonte, and Bukowski was just a little too much bottom of the bottle for me. But John Fonte, I could hear he to me was a little bit like Steinbeck, but with a little more down and outer. That's just my take.
Yeah, Superstar. I think, it's funny that I think I provided the music on that. I think that was one of those things where maybe in my head I was thinking like, what would it be like to be a superstar? And I know, as silly as that sounds, I was really trying to emulate that, and what my take of what a superstar. It's exciting and this and that, and yet it's great that Sheryl could take this completely, left to center idea lyrically and turn it into something that's really unique and not just a straight ahead kind of song. So that brings a whole new thing to it.
Well, we had been out on the road with Crowded House, and after the fourth gig, Neil came to me and said that Paul's leaving. Paul was the drummer for Crowded House, and he was having some really bad depression, and I could tell something was going on with him. And so Neil asked if they could use my drummer for just 2 or 3 gigs until they found somebody else. And we were the opening band. Usually when you're the opening band on a big tour, the headliner doesn't pay you any, doesn't pay any attention to you at all. And yet we were thrust into this sort of partnership because of my drummer. And it turned out my drummer played the first couple of gigs, and we were on the side of the stage, and they loved him so much that they came to me and said, can we use him for the whole gig? And we were like little kids because we love Crowded House. We're like, absolutely. And that really forged a friendship between all of us. And after that tour, I got a phone call about Paul having committed suicide. And my last memory of him had been him telling me about his daughter had just been born, and her name was Sunday. And I said, was she born on a Sunday? And he said, no, she was born on a Tuesday. And that really, it's just a conscious stream of, he had a daughter named Easter. She was born on a Tuesday night. There's just little references to him, but, it's all under the guise of how precious life is, and you don't know when you're going to see somebody again or if you're going to see them, and that we're all on the same trajectory of just trying to find a little semblance of peace in our lives and some joy, and to not miss those moments that are meant to be reminders of who we are.
Yeah, it's funny, those having these conversations, or however you arrive at the pieces that form a song, and someone can just tell you what's going on with them, and then it's almost like a magnet that sentiment fits perfectly, and that's what makes Sheryl great, is that she can recognize that. It's almost like it instantly attaches itself to music. I think on that song, I really had more to do with just the music part of it, and I think I had some kind of little guitar riff that I was playing, and up at this cabin in
Yosemite. We went up
Yosemite.
to yeah.
And that was kind of a crazy week of songwriting. We got Sheryl, and I brought up all this equipment to Brian McLeod's cabin that was like out in the middle of nowhere, and the air conditioning didn't work, and it was probably like 100 degrees out. It was just like,
So we could only record like at 4 in the morning when it was just starting to get cool. But that song started off with that. It feels like a walking pace, and then immediately there was this road imagery in my head. And that's sometimes how a song can get started, is the feel, is the, where does it put you when you hear it? And that was that feel. My most vivid memory of it, well, 2 things, is playing it in New Orleans, recording it, and having all the neighbors hear it. But the other was singing the vocal until 4:30 in the morning, and catching a flight like at 6:30, because it had to be like mixed that day at Sunset Sound. So I wasn't as like in the thinking about the outcome of it as I was about the process of getting it as good as it could be. Just for me, it resonated so heavily with me, that song, because I felt like, well, I was really mad at the world, and I felt like the world was mad at me. So that song had a lot of meaning for me. I had been the it girl, and then once you become the it girl and you're everywhere, then people are sick of you, and it's tear down time. And by the time I started making my second record, it was full on. Every time I took a breath, people criticized me. So going to New Orleans, actually, that was really the reason that I went down to New Orleans in the first place, was just to get away from everything. And so Bill and I chose to go to New Orleans to kind of be out of the fray, and then he left. So it just was I was really super prickly, and I think the record has a little bit of that angst on it, and it served the record pretty well.
It had a real purpose. I mean, it just shows you need, a little bit of that angst can go a long way, Yeah, my favorite memory of that was definitely being at Kingsway Studio in New Orleans in the French Quarter, and the Quarter has its own unique atmosphere and all this, but I remember recording it and then going for a walk with Sheryl. I don't know, we were just going somewhere just get some fresh air or whatever, and we're walking past the neighbor, and the lady came out, oh, that song, something about happy, it's so stuck in my head. That one is really, that is amazing. She made some comment about like, I can't get that song out of my head, and
we're like, we have a hit with the 60-year-old ladies.
Yeah, exactly. So we knew
it's going to be really big on the middle-age chart. Well, that actually was the first song that we wrote, and we wrote that actually. Choose That Music Club had just been mixed, I believe, and we were talking about, should we try to get it on the record? Should we put it on the record, or should we save it for something else? I think we decided at that point that we'd do the X-Files thing, and that song was really, it was a song about feeling like you just didn't fit in anywhere, and what it feels like to be on the outside looking in, never to be one of the cool kids. That's kind of my story.
Yeah, I think it was around the time that I just met Sheryl, and I think I had this baritone guitar or something, and she asked me, oh, what kind of guitar is that, and so I took it out of the case, and it's, oh wow, what is that? It's a baritone. So we plugged it in or whatever, and she wanted to hear what it sounded like, so I just started noodling around, and I was just playing this like little arpeggio thing, just really noodling around, and she was like, oh, what is that? That's really cool. And then the next thing I know, we're just putting it together for, writing a song around this arpeggio thing. So just like that, sometimes it can be you can pick up a different instrument or a weird old guitar, and maybe it's really hard to play, but somehow a song kind of pops out of it,
I think there was some talk about it going on Tuesday Music Club, but I think because Bill hadn't been a big part of it, and I think it was just, there was a moment in time where they were looking and we had this song and it just worked.
Yeah, it probably worked out better anyways, because I think sometimes you'll write a bunch of songs and there'll be a few that really don't work on a record or don't fit in. And at least, taking it to television or a movie, sometimes have a really good place for it to really be able to do something.
That song actually was it was part of the New Orleans thing, and a lot of that I actually felt like was inspired a little bit by the craziness that was going on around us. Brian was going through a lot. Bill had already left. It felt like people were just losing it. Like the pressure. I don't know if it was the pressure of making my second record, being a part of it, being so close to success that you have to like sabotage it, that kind of thing. It just felt like people's heads were blowing off a little bit. And then you compound that with the O.J. Simpson trial in the middle of it. He gets off. All of New Orleans is out in the streets. It felt a little bit kooky, like a little frenetic. And it was funny because Bill had come in and he had dyed his hair platinum. This middle-aged guy. It just felt like everywhere you looked, there were signs of people that were kind of a little bit crumbling, And Madonna had made the sex book, and it was, squatting over cameras, and it just was like, explosion. So that song was just sort of a montage of observations of people just losing it a little bit, There's a Ouija board in it, and there's what was his name, Meeks?
Joe Meek.
Joe Meek.
Joe Meeks.
Yeah, there was an interview or an article about him. Did he kill himself or something?
Yeah, I guess he took a shotgun and pulled the trigger, and they said when they found him, it was like his whole head had blown off, and it looked like a burnt out candle or something, the wick of a burned out candle.
Listen, nothing is safe from us writing about us.
That song, I definitely, that has to be one of the most enjoyable and unorthodox songwriting session that I think we've ever had. I think Sheryl had the chorus idea, and it was just like, well, okay, what are the verses? And then she just sort of playfully said, hey, I think we had like all these. We used to get all these
We used to
magazines.
get TV magazines and science magazines and fake news, and we would
Coffee
just pull
table
from
books.
everything.
And just put them out on a coffee table, and then just like, you need lyrics, just like open up one of these books, and
You'd
then,
always find an interesting line, and some of the best lines came out of TV Guide.
yeah.
We started a song called Sweet Rosalyn that started with the line, "Slappin' leather was devised during a wild time in her life." And it is basically about, who knows, slapping leather, what is that? So it just sounded so interesting. It's like, okay, hit it. Here we go,
That was actually, I think it wasn't from a TV guide, but I think it was from like
An S&M magazine.
S&M magazine. And it was about this housewife, like an ordinary housewife, who had this sort of double life, and to make a little extra money because maybe, they were running a little short, she would go out and be this dominatrix. And so I think we were just throwing these things around, and then it's like, hey, yeah, it's this housewife stripper dominatrix, why not write a song about her?
Okay, my favorite mistake is my favorite song. It is. I don't know. It just for some reason I hear it, when I hear it on the radio, it doesn't annoy me. Yeah, I'm sure. Who doesn't have a favorite mistake? And then it became like the end-all be-all to find out who was it about. And there have been famous names in my past, but why give it away and spoil it? But yeah, that was a straight-up joy song because we wrote it really fast. A lot of what is on there was from my original writing vocal, not even a scratch vocal. And then I called everybody I knew, from Amy Mann to my publisher, and said, I think I've ripped somebody off. Pretty sure this song's already been written. It's just so familiar. And because I just knew we were going to get sued, and nobody had ever heard
Nobody
it.
took claim.
Yeah.
So
we put it out.
I remember, being at Globe Studios, which was just basically this big warehouse in New York, and it was a half-finished build where the walls were just, sheet rock that hadn't been taped or painted or anything. It was just like kind of makeshift, but it was cool. We really enjoyed it. And I remember Sheryl saying, "There's all these people that are around, Simon Kirk, and there's all these different people in the building, and we should have a little party and get together and jam with some people." And I remember telling me, "But I don't jam. I don't like to jam. But we need to, can we come up with something that we can jam on, And so I say, oh, maybe I think I was carrying around like a shoebox full of cassettes or something like that. And so we started digging through and listening to it, and there was this chord progression of Favorite Mistake. I think there was a couple of chords that weren't right, but we kind of sat down, and then it was like Sheryl instantly had ideas, and we worked on it. And I think in the end we were going, okay, well, now I don't think we can jam on this.
This is a song. I forgot about that. That's
Yeah.
funny. Yeah. That area wasn't about poverty. It was about a hang. And that hang was a lot of transvestites, a lot of cross-dressers. Hell Club was over there. It was a pretty seedy, but also very interesting area. There were people that made that area their hang, and there were a lot of regulars or a lot of prostitutes over there. And any given night, if you looked out the window, you would see this one dude who already had breasts, but wasn't fully changed yet, who would walk around in maybe, I don't know if it was a G-string, but something really skimpy, and a long fur coat with, you could see his breast, and high heels. And just people like that, where you're just like, give me a beat, just so inspiring to write about these people who, that's not dress up. They're living it, they're living the dream. And so that was what inspired the song. That in conjunction with the fact that we were in New York, neither one of us actually really from there. And there's this big threat of Saddam Hussein. And so there was a lot going on that was creating the atmosphere for writing a song like There Goes the Neighborhood. Oh, and then we put Bobby Keys on it, and that made it even more crazy. So
I remember when we were putting that song together, there was a middle section, and there's not a lot of the songs that we've written don't have like a jam section. Neither one of us are actually really real jammers, but for some reason I was hearing like a kind of Can't You Hear Me Knocking kind of middle section. It just seemed to work with like how greasy the streets of New York, and we were right there in the thick of it. And then I was talking to Sheryl about that, like, oh, it'd be so cool to do that. And then lo and behold, I think you found out that the Stones were actually in town. And we were able to get Bobby Keys to come down with the Rolling Stones horn section, come down and lay down the law, I mean, they were amazing. We were on the road, I think, at the time. One of our guitar techs had brought out the 12-string. I don't know why we decided to go with 12-string. I don't know. It was just like, hey, give me what's different. Okay, let's get a 12-string. And so I take this guitar out, and I don't know if somebody had tuned it a certain way, or if it had been on a flight and you have to like detune the string so that it doesn't snap the neck. And then I just started playing this thing, and it's like, whoa, it's almost like that chord progression just came out because of it being in this weird tuning. And I all of a sudden had to figure out how to play guitar in this odd tuning, but it actually kind of led to writing that song.
yeah, and that song was I was going through a little bit of an Appalachian thing, and that song for me felt very Appalachian, As the River Wide, and lyrically, having been in a relationship that I was really pretty tender. Relationship had fallen apart, and it's about convincing yourself that everything's okay. And so writing that kind of heartbroken lyric on a real driving, almost Fleetwood Mac Appalachian feel it really worked. That song actually came in through Jeff.
One of my friends had given me this jigsaw puzzle gift, and I was having this whole battle. Most of my friends know I've always had a battle with religion and, to believe or not to believe. And I get this jigsaw puzzle. It's like the Last Supper jigsaw puzzle. And I'm like, my friend, like, man, why are you doing this? You're trying to torture me. So I took the jigsaw puzzle and I put it up I had this downstairs library in my Portland place. And I never took the puzzle out of the wrap or out of the box. So I just put it up like artwork in this bookshelf. And I was trying to come up with some ideas for Sheryl, and I look up at it, and I think one of the lines is, we sit around and just like gurus in borrowed robes. Because I was just looking at the Last Supper with the apostles all in the robes and Jesus in the middle. And so I came up with that line, and then it kind of unfolded into this song that is more of like something, nothing, kind of a existentialist sort of thing. I don't know. It was just like maybe a thought, an idea, and I brought it to Sheryl, and so we just kind of, put it together.
I never know if a song is gonna be a big hit or.
It's kind of hard to really know right off the bat, because most of the time you're writing and you think everything is like,
awful.
Oh, this, like
this really sucks.
Once you play it for someone, you get an idea of like if you're connecting at all.
That was, I have to say that was a really fun song, because I think we worked on it at your house in Portland. I remember singing it there, but before that we were in New York, and I was once again flat on my back, and I had a really bad flu. And I remember watching a video with J-Lo, and she's like, in some hot two-piece number with like water pouring down her in the ocean, and she's talking about you have to have money for this, and to buy my love. I think it was called To Buy My Love or something like that. And that actually wound up being sort of informed the whole song, about what's important. It's about wanting what you have and not what you want.
I remember Sheryl had asked me to come out to New York and write, and I think it was in a time period where I think I was doing my own record or something, and I know we hadn't really done that much writing, and she's like, we've got to have a couple of songs that we've written together, and normally have something like a guitar riff or a title or something like that, and they didn't have anything. And I'm living in Portland at the time, and I just remember it was raining, and I'm going to New York, and it was really sunshiny there, and I'm like, I was thinking going to New York to soak up the sun or something. Like, I had this thought in my head, and I had a little bit of a melody that I tried to keep in my head all the way to New York. And then when I got to Sheryl's loft, she's like, do you have anything, I was thinking like, gosh, I don't know. This is like, it's so poppy and so white, So I just started kind of like playing the sort of idea as best as I could. And then I was surprised that she was just like, oh, wait a minute, I know what to do. And I think we also had some conversation about
we had many conversations, and one of them was the fact that I had just spent the last couple of weeks with Steve Earle. And so the whole song starts off with us spending time with a communist, because he always jokes about him being a communist. And the song really was just a conscious stream of random thoughts, but once pieced together, they made complete and total sense to me. And at the end of the song, it's really just, I look at it and think it's, about letting go. Just, I'm going to soak up the sun. I'm going to look up. I'm going to quit sweating the small stuff and just get going,
From what I remember of it, too, like we had a conversation about I think it was like Columbine or something like that. That's where that reference of I've got my 45 on, so I'll rock on or whatever. And I think, from what I remember, I could be totally wrong about this, but you were kind of also looking at it as a younger version of yourself or something, as a sort of disgruntled teenager, how the whole world is just like, everybody seems to be completely absurd. So I mean, I don't know, there's so many different dynamics, I think, and when you're putting something together, little pieces that are added here and there, and then miraculously they can form into something. And that song, it's funny, I remember, I'm not one to really follow the charts or anything like that, but I remember my publishing administrator said Soak Up the Sun has been on the charts for like almost a year, like in the top 20 or something like that in the adult contemporary. And I'm like, are you kidding? I mean, I had heard it on the radio a bunch of times, but I was like, I had no idea how well it had
I remember
done.
when it hit 52 weeks, I was like, gosh, that's a lot. Weeks. And then I was like, wait a minute.
52 weeks.
That's a year. I have been known to actually tell Jeff what I want, which I know is not the funnest thing if you're Jeff Trott, to have somebody tell you, I want to do a cool kind of quirky rock and roll Stones rip-off song, and I think that was one of them. I did a whole album where I felt like, oh, I just want to do classic rock, and there's quite a bit of me saying, okay, Jeff, go listen to this and listen to that. And I'm not a great guitar player, and one of the things that I love about working with Jeff is that he doesn't do what you expect, and so that keeps you from sounding cheeseball, I think.
Well, she's a great guitar player, by the way. That's
well,
like,
I'm not a good write a riff, so I'm always like, Jeff, I need a riff. I need a riff, Jeff. I need a riff. And that was one of those songs. I need a riff.
In almost every rock song that we've done together, there's always some sort of like slight psychedelic vocal treatment thrown in somewhere. I don't know why that is. It just always seems. Well, I don't think we even consciously sit down and say, well, hey, we need to do that. It just always ends up happening,
It is sort of the sister song to If It Makes You Happy. I love that tuning. I wanted to write something else that, kind of in the spirit of that. And we had so many good verses, and it was just, I could not figure out what the chorus was, and I sang Abilene because it sounded so great, and then ultimately it just became the feeling of a place. But you know, there's a line in it that actually Jeff came up with that I just love about carrying your flag. Oh, what's the line? Can't you see I'm holding your flag?
Yeah.
Just the idea that when somebody is down and they're, you know, they just are having a hard time pulling themselves up, just the imagery of somebody like, you know, I'm going to pull the weight for you. And the whole song already has those chord changes and intervals that make you feel, you know, that have that melancholy. So when we wrote You're an Original, there was this really glaring, I don't know, a really glaring example of how false the music industry had become as well, where music wasn't being rewarded for being original at all. It was rewarded for being the same as what was just done. Case in point, Britney Spears. She'd just broken, and it was like this mad scramble to find 10 other girls that were just like Britney Spears so they could get them out immediately. And when that happens, it renders everybody else as archaic or obsolete. And we were sort of in that boat. I think I was just about to turn 40 at the time, and it was really unnerving me, the fact that being an artist wasn't rewardable. You know, being different, being authentic, coming up with something new, something inspired. It was really more about how do we capitalize on cute girl can dance, because that's really what's working now. And that's just the death of artistry. And that, for me, that's what the song actually was about. Turn around, there'll be 100 more just like you. You know, you are completely dispensable, because right behind you is a girl that's even cuter and can even dance better than you. And that's the kiss of death for artistry.
It's a total talent show kind of mentality that I think just is, to me, more commerce than art. I think when Sheryl first came out in the early 90s, you know, I think back what was happening there wasn't a lot of women that were really making great strides in music. I think it was really coming out of the grunge period too. So it was like really male dominated with this really super tribal rock thing, which, you know, I liked some of that, you know. I mean, it was its own thing and it was unique and all that. But for Sheryl to come out through that time period and do something that was completely original and different, there's a lot of people that I think try to imitate Sheryl, you know. So to me, that song.
And had them killed.
Yes.
You know, I listen to some music from the 90s, and I think, gosh, that really doesn't hold up very well, like huge bands. I think probably because we loved how classic bands sounded and how good it sounded on the radio, that we tried to make records that were super warm and that sounded like they, you know, they sounded like they could have come up through that period. And I think radio I mean, that seems to be more timeless than sort of what was going on in the 80s and 90s. I think we kind of straddled that classic rock sound meets trying to sound current. We like the old vintage stuff. We're snobs about it. Well, Jeff had been listening to the radio initially, and you heard an interview about Terence McKenna, right? And that's how you got turned on it? Because I remember you telling me about it.
Well, I heard this interview, and then the strangest thing, I have this friend who's from the Bay Area that gave me that Archaic Revival book, and it totally changed my thought about, you know, the possibility that the mushroom was the reason why human beings develop speech. You know, I just thought that was fascinating, you know, reading it. But I think that, you know, talking to Sheryl about this book and this interview thing, and then it just kind of like opened up into a song, and I think it has like a big open tuning acoustic guitar, and there's some, you know, sort of ethereal tablas, and it's kind of a very spacey kind of song. Yeah, her singing is incredible on that.
Oh, thanks. Well, and I was living in LA at the time, and this is pre-kids and pre-cancer and everything. And there's this thing that can happen when you're a touring musician and you never really feel like you're home, because there is no home. Your home is a constant state of flux, and when you are in one place, that doesn't feel normal. What feels normal after you've really gotten used to being on the road is being on the road. And so much of my 10, 15 years in there, I felt like I was constantly looking out the window and watching things go by. And so there is that feeling of a hybrid life where you're kind of split between two realities. LA, in and of itself, its own reality. I'm talking about being in the LA jail, where you're basically a prisoner to expectation and failure. And so, and in the last verse, it talks about sort of how the scope of humanity could fit on the head of a pin. It puts everything into perspective while you're being held to the standard of Los Angeles, and what's the next project you've got going, and what's the last thing that you did, what's the last record you made, and that being what defines your importance or your validity. How sort of silly it seems at the end of the day when you consider how large the universe is and how fleeting our lives are. So, not to get too deep, but for me, I have a sense of melancholy about everything. I think I was born with a sense of melancholy, but there is a sense of melancholy for me even when I sing it now, is that you can't get back the moments that you've wasted. And we'll never know our origin, but we're pretty arrogant most moments of our lives about how much we matter. And what really would serve us is to sort of be connected to our fragility, our humanity, a more compassionate sort of outlook on life, because it is over in a second. So yeah, I mean, there's a tenderness to it and a feeling of, wow, I've just been resigned to being a tiny little piece of fluff on Horton's, Horton Hears a Who. You're that big, in the grand scheme of things. I was raised Presbyterian, the frozen chosen. And as my mom refers to them as, we're stoic, but we're still going to heaven. Anyway, I laugh about it. I've been on a lot of different spiritual trips. I do believe in God. I believe that God is a benevolent figure. There's no doubt in my mind that there's something bigger than all of us. There's something bigger than our planet that belongs in our solar system, that belongs in the universe. There's something bigger than that even. But I lived and was engaged to an atheist, and it was a real trip, because a lot of his perception of things came from the place of everyone's a hypocrite. And so that's kind of what the song is about. It's asking the question, if there is no God, then how do you explain anything? But that's why that's why I'm a believer. For somebody else, it's the exact opposite question.
Yeah, Letter to God. That I remember Sheryl having this whole idea, and it was, all I really did was I was really just a passenger on that song and helped shape it and everything, but it really was come from a place that she was really feeling, and I totally related to it in so many ways, because throughout my life I've gone through searching for if there is a God, or who it is, or how I relate to organized religion. And I grew up as a Catholic. I went to a Catholic school. I was an altar boy and all this stuff. And then at some point, I don't know what happened, I kind of fell out of my full belief in how Christianity, puts everything into one little organized book. And I kind of didn't really feel that way. So when she had this whole concept, it's like I felt like it was mirroring everything that I was feeling. So I just played the good collaborator and bouncing phrases and stuff. But that's one of those songs that I can listen to today, and I just love the atmosphere of it. It's really and I can remember recording that song in some little punk rock studio in Austin, Texas. That the gear was all patched together with duct tape, and, and it was cool. It's maybe not one of those songs that gets performed all that much. I do remember the time period, though, of that. I mean, not only, have we written these songs that have been released, but who knows, we probably have written like 500 songs all together, or parts of, like half of a song here and there. So.
Well, a lot of that record, Lifetime's record, and Jeff knows this, bad period in my life. Just really tumultuous time. And, in your, you can try so hard to write in codes. It's like the Book of Revelations, write everything in signs and codes so that people don't really know exactly what you're going through. There's a lot of that on that record. Living with someone who portrays themselves to be savior to the world, which was my experience at that time, was just a real soul sapper. And so that's part of that song. And there's a lot of that on that record. That the Lifetime's record, the Wildflower record has a lot of underlying meaning.
Some of it is very stream of conscious too. I think it's just like throwing things out, and then somehow they just kind of fall into place, like reading tea leaves or something. And just little scattered phrases, and then to try to make sense of what those little pieces are, and then maybe they're just little snapshots of how you were at that time, maybe confused or heartbroken or whatever, and then you just, without being really specific on that one, I do remember enjoying just the groove of that. I don't know, it's got a thing,
It does, it has a cool thing. Well, Jeff and I, seems like we always, with the exception of this record, we always have a song on the record that is sort of like a snapshot of where the city or our surroundings, where it's at. Like we just have always had those songs that were kind of just fun songs, and that's one of them. And that's full of cool imagery, and the listener gets to fill in the blanks with their own experiences. That song, I guess at the time it sort of was a song about desiring to feel completely liberated and not connected to anything, but just selfishly having a great time. Liberated to me now means I feel liberated now because I don't feel like I have anybody that I need to answer to artistically. I can write anything I want. I feel like I know how to, it's less about seeking peace and it's more about accepting peace. Whereas my whole life I've always been on this habit trail to figure out, I've got to figure out some way to, to find peace. And it's not finding peace. There is peace within. You have to accept it, embrace it, own it. So, that's to me what living it up means. What's your...
Yeah,
a big fat joint and some Guinness on tap. No, I'm kidding. Yeah.
That's good. For me, that song to me was kind of like a reaction to sometimes you're thinking too much, and then all you want to really do is just throw everything out the window and just be and just enjoy yourself in a, I'm not going to say rebellious way, I guess revel in the moment or whatever, rather than being caught up in all the minutia that we've been subjected to. So that's what I think that was the feeling, at least, that I was getting from that, or where we went with it. I think living in LA, I kind of feel like that really ran its course for me, and all the competition, and there's also community there too. As big, as massive as LA is, with all the different people, there seemed to be more of a sense of community there years ago as a musician that I really loved. There's a lot of very creative people there. And just over the years, I think it's sort of, vaporizing and disappearing, or it's just a different set of people are now the community or whatever. And I felt like I didn't really, not that I was ever really trying to fit in with anybody anyways, but coming to Nashville, I felt like I had more of a real sense of purpose. And so to me, having that is kind of liberating, is having a real purpose, or knowing what you really want to do and stuff, even though that's not really living it up. But I guess in a way it is kind of, it's like really living out your desires, and in the sense that's my kind of living it up or whatever. That sounds pretty boring, but that's me. More peaceful, or
you know
more
what living it up is? It's binge watching a whole series on Netflix in one night. That's living it up to me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Kids in bed, 8:30, watching a whole season of Better Things or Stranger Things or House of Cards. One of the things I love about I Don't Want to Know is I love the intervals of that song, because they're all the chords I gravitate to. They're kind of sad. They're kind of tragic. Like, that song to me is just, when I think of the sound and the feel of it, it just is tragic. And that is how I felt this year. I felt like there were some real serious guttural blows this year with Bowie and Prince. You just didn't expect it. And as I get older, obviously, when somebody like that goes, I immediately go to my own mortality. They represent a time to me that is directly associated with my innocence. You're a kid and you're listening to music and you're buying records. Certainly Bowie, and even Prince. I have Prince albums. I have the first Prince record on vinyl, and I don't know. Anybody that goes from that period on even older is hard for me now. It represents something to me.
Yeah, it's really these people that have left us, really represent our musical connections, and then also being a sort of soundtrack too, that you just never thought that David Bowie would. He seemed, eternally young, and always lived to be the artist. And
always recreating himself.
Himself.
Even in his death, which I think is just
that's
really
pretty
mind-boggling.
Remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good thing to learn, from somebody like that. And I mean, learning about, music and songwriting through our heroes like that. Even in his death, he really still brought us something, a unique spin on something that most people are horrified by.
Yeah, I mean, I actually experience different things from tour to tour with songs, because sometimes you write a song and you're not exactly sure what it's about entirely, and then as you've lived a few years, sometimes the meaning can change, or sometimes it can actually become more realized. But for everything that I've ever written, and that goes for anything that I've written with Jeff as well, there is a sense of truth about every experience that is connected to my perception of things. Everything I've ever written has been attached to my perception or my experience. So even though it may be of a moment, I can put myself right back in that moment. In fact, it can take me right back into that moment of looking at my clothes out on the front yard, or that kind of thing, where it's like, I know exactly how that felt in that moment when I sing it, because the words were written then. Do you find that?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's just like they say, your sense of smell and memory are so connected and all that. I think that's so true when you write something. You have different recollections of things. I mean, we've written so many songs together, and sometimes they, they can blend together, and it's like, hey, but they do urge back these memories that that are very significant. It's that kind of songwriters, aha, this is where it's taking me, and it's like, now it's growing, and now I've got to just make sure that this thing, has a good place in the world, almost like children or whatever. Like the song is just growing into this thing, and like Sheryl said, maybe, well, she is out, touring and singing these songs that maybe they take on a different meaning, and hopefully a good song will have a lot of different meanings, for yourself and then for the people that are listening too. The sentiment of that song is, it's funny, it's kind of like finding yourself, realizing, wow, everything in my life has really changed, and there's a kind of like a lost innocence, and it's like, whoa, in a way, being naive, I guess. And so I think that song was like a kind of just a big question mark, like, once again, kind of like that melancholic, like, oh, what happened to being that young person in the world and thinking everything was a certain way, and then realizing, like, hey, where did everybody go, and so I think it has like a childlike quality to it, and I think, maybe melodically it kind of had a real sort of Beatlesque thing to it. That song, I really felt that that personally I didn't have any sort of control as to where it went. It just kind of had its own little life,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the song started off with a Paul McCartney feel on the piano, and so in some ways it sort of dictated what direction it would go, and we didn't really go, we can't do this or we can't do that, because they did it before. We just did our own take on what it kind of lent itself to, and how would we do it, and the whole thing is actually, to me, I looked at it as like a little mini movie. It was kind of like The Little Prince or something. It just felt like a crazy world revolving by this little tiny figure, and that the whole record actually, to me, is symbolic of that, like just feeling like a little lost soul in the middle of an immense amount of confusion. And certainly I think I wielded a lot of that, because I was going through a really, really confusing time where I felt like I had lost my sense of self. And that song, and many of the songs on the record, I think are symbolic of that. There are lyrics that I write entirely that are just, they are what they are. And Jeff is very generous about, just letting it be as it is. And that song, I've been asked to get married, and 2 out of the 3 times I've been asked were last-ditch effort diamonds. Like, okay, I know you're getting ready to leave, and I don't really want to marry you, but if that's what it will take to keep you here, because I don't want to go through the pain of being dumped, then okay, I'll give you a diamond ring. And that's kind of what that song is about. It's like, okay, forget the diamond. Who cares about the diamond? I don't want the diamond. I want the union, the partnership, the commitment, or whatever. So, that was sort of more of a me song than Jeff.
Yeah. I was a willing participant,
yes.
I guess. But I think
he held my purse.
Yeah, exactly. I was, I went and got some tea, and I brought it over and said, "Is this, good enough?" But you have, when you're writing, sometimes you come up with the idea, an idea that's half-baked, and then the other person can really turn it into something, and the other way, or sometimes it's just having a sympathetic ear, or being able to bounce, some lines off, and I'm very aware of how she perceives the world. I mean, we have similar views to the world, and so it's easy for me to sympathize with that and go with it and think like, and then also you got to remember it's a song too. It's something that is, hopefully could be played by other people or,
Right. Yeah.
So in the end you're supplying a song and it's
still just a story.
It's just a story, so.
Well, to give credit where credit's due, Mike Elizondo came in and he had this little bit of a germ of an idea musically. And the idea of it was, for me in particular, spirituality. I just, one of my struggles with any kind of religion that is based on a set of beliefs that rules out a whole sect of people, I just always have trouble with that if you believe in God, no matter what you call God, whether it's Allah or Jehovah, whatever it is that you call God, Yahweh. So that's the song. It just explores the idea that if, which we also delve into on this record, if God is a benevolent God, then are we not all on the right track, seeking to emulate God, no matter how you get there? I mean, there are people that have been historically alive that are worth emulating that aren't messianic, but isn't it at the end of the day about seeking enlightenment and being the best version of what God created as possible? And aren't there rewards for that? And so that's really what the song is. And at the time when we had invaded Iraq and there was so much fear about other religions, to go and get a Farsi singer to sing it, I felt like this is provocative and it's brave and bold, and maybe it's making the message. It didn't become a big hit, so a lot of people didn't hear it, but I still think it's important to, investigate.
Yeah, you have no idea what could be a song that will connect with people, but hopefully you get heard, so I think that any song is worth really, putting all of your concerted effort into it if it's something that's inspiring you.
Well, I just did a whole study on that for a project that we were doing for CNN that didn't get picked up, and my question was, can a song galvanize people anymore? And I'm not sure that anything can galvanize people. I think a nuclear bomb can galvanize people, because I think that at this point that's the only thing that will get our attention. I mean, sadly, and that sounds horribly catastrophic, but that really is, to me, what I think it would take to wake up people who are so deeply, who are detached. So do I think a song can, change anything or wake people up or galvanize? I don't. But nonetheless, it's not going to stop me from writing about, what's going on out there.
Yeah, it's always, worthy putting out those parts of your character and letting your audience know where you're at. And Gasoline, for me, I think I just brought in a title to that, and then Sheryl was able to really craft that one. I don't know, I hate to use that word craft. It sounds like you're brewing a beer or something, but it's almost like that song is like a little, not science fiction, but it's kind of like I guess it's like a little short story.
It's a little bit
science.
like Mad Max. There's a little sci-fi-ness to it, but underneath it all, there's some truths.
Yeah. I remember we wrote that in your basement or something like that, and we were just kind of like, wanting to do something that's sort of kind of classic rock ballad kind of thing. I don't know. You sort of had an idea, and you had a verse melody and some lyrics and stuff, and then when we got to the chorus, we were kind of stuck, and we're just like, gosh, what is the chorus? I mean, we've got this beautiful verse and everything, and then I was just looking at Sheryl, and I just said, come on, just give me something, give it to me, like that, and then she's like, oh man, that's it. It's like and then it just kind of like, it's one of those, it just clicks, sometimes.
He's like a lyric coach.
Please come
on,
to
give it to me.
Give it to me.
Like the time he said, come on, if it makes you happy, it can't be that bad.
Come on, hey, that's a song.
I don't don't even know if it was a hit song, but I will say that we did sit down and try to write what we felt like was a Jeff and Sheryl song. I think after a lot of years, it was like a song that was like, oh, it's a Jeff and Sheryl song, you know.
I was on a vacation in Costa Rica with my family, and I mean, I hardly ever get out and go on vacation. Always something is getting in the way of that. But anyway, so I was on vacation, and then I had gotten an email from Sheryl saying, hey, let's get together and write. I'm putting together this country record. And so what I brought was like, you know, I had at a moment I thought, well, I could, you know, go to Costa Rica and spend a lot of money on this nice resort and do all this stuff, or keep the money and stay at home and go do something locally. And so I kind of brought that idea to Sheryl, and then we just started throwing.
Because that's what the song is about. It's about staying home and saving money. And making your vacation a staycation.
Staycation, that's what it was. It was the staycation line, and just putting.
Which was really what was going on at the time, because at that time actually there were gas shortages, and people were a lot of the news stations were covering people not being able to take road trips that summer or vacation. They couldn't afford to go on planes because the tickets were so high because the fuel, you know. And we wound up writing this song about people not being able to afford to go on vacation, so they were going to stay home and make a vacation. We went into a time change in the chorus, and then it started feeling a little bit like something that Stevie Wonder would have done, like on Talking Book. And you know, he is still such a great player. He played a lot of clavinet, a lot of Rhodes and stuff, and so sometimes when you subliminally get into like a mode of, you know, there was a little bit of a Stevie ether on that you go, oh, what about some Rhodes, or what about some, you know, clav, or some whirly distorted or whatever. And sometimes that kind of informs your choice about what you're going to play.
And I think we were even listening to something off of Songs in the Key of Life, and getting inspired by, like, I don't know, I can't remember what song it was, but then it wasn't, it turned into something completely different.
You know, and talking about, was it Calculator or whatever, I really feel like Jeff and I, thank God, we're still like little kids in the studio. It's just really like a playroom in here, I think. We just are constantly trying to like entertain ourselves, and wouldn't it be cool if, and do you remember that thing that he did? What if, there's a lot of what ifs and then trying stuff. And Jeff played the wah-wah part, but Gary Clark Jr. played, we contacted him and said, dude, this has got you all over it. So he played, even though there wasn't very much room for him to play, he played some waka waka and some fuzz tone. Yeah, that was one song that we said, look, we need to write kind of a country rock song. That's one thing we do really well, and we really haven't done that in a while. So we said, you know, can you give us something that is like a mid-tempo, just country rock feeling, you know, pretty straight up groove. And that groove, even though it sounds really cool and it is really unique, it gave us the feel that we were looking for, to write something that was a little more conventional. And the lyric, you know, I don't really know how that came about, except I think there was just so much chaos this summer with having had an election last for 2 years and having been bombarded with so much hate rhetoric and so much just cynicism. I mean, the climate was really chaotic, and I think it had a lot of people on edge. And for me, that song is really about searching, and for me, there's a little bit of sadness in it, you know, that sometimes you have to go so far away from who you are to find out what you really believe in. And I think that's part of the story of this past election, is that people have really gotten away from who they originally started out to be or who they wanted to be. And it's going to take a while for us to get back to being the kind of nation, the kind of people, to reinvent ourselves or to remember who we innately are. I think what's happening right now is that we're finding ourselves having to really do some soul searching about what it is we really believe, and we've been taken on a long journey that I feel like we're still in the middle of. That's kind of ugly, and that's kind of where the song started. I mean, the line, "Have you ever seen a person have a heart attack that'll stop you dead in your tracks?" I mean, that's kind of how I feel about what's happened. Like we've watched really the worst come out in people, and that I think that song just was on the surface, just waiting to be expressed.
It's a really good reflection of that feeling that probably everybody really has with this whole, no matter who you voted for, everybody had that uncomfortable feeling. And so I think the song really represents that turbulent feeling, and I mean, just even sonically it all kind of has this thing that's angular, trying to, get yourself out of a crate or something. I don't know, but
sort of hopefully with a little bit of hope. Sometimes you have to put on your gloves and fight. You got to stay in the ring, and when you feel like all is lost, or when we're so far away from who we thought we were going to be, that we may take the long way home, but we're going to get back. And that's really what this song is about.